Today's speakers are Lora Killian and David Cornwell. Lora is the Director of Transparency and Disclosure at Synchrogenix, a Certara company. She is responsible for the development and oversight of Synchrogenix's entire suite of transparency services, which include anonymization, clinical trial disclosure, and lay language summary development. Ms. Killian has played an integral role consulting with sponsors in the development of company-specific transparency policies to address the latest wave of regulation arising out of the European Union and the United States. David Cornwell founded PleaseTech in 2002. Over the last 14 years, he has developed PleaseTech and its flagship product, PleaseReview, into the world's leading collaborative document review and co-authoring solution. David is a science and engineering graduate of Imperial College London and holds a Master's of Business Administration degree from the University of Bath. Lora and David, welcome to today's event. I'll now turn it over to Lora to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our presentation, A Streamlined Approach to Policy 70. Today, we're going to cover the regulatory landscape of Policy 70, then we'll provide discussion on operationalizing Policy 70 and the complications that this regulation creates. Then we have the pleasure of hearing from David Cornwell, the CEO of PleaseTech, about the exciting new redaction capabilities being provided in the upcoming releases of PleaseReview. Lastly, I will present our proposed streamlined approach to this policy based on our partnership with PleaseTech and their upcoming release of PleaseReview. Throughout my portion of the presentation, I hope to give you a sense of the complications resulting from Policy 70 and the collaboration required to manage those complexities. So let's get started with the basics. As I assume most of you know, Policy 70 was published by the EMA in October of 2014. It was in some ways intended to be the EMA's sequel to Policy 43. Policy 43 is the EMA's Freedom of Information policy in which individuals can make requests directly to the EMA for the majority of documents that the EMA has used in its decision-making process. Policy 43 is retrospective and applies to documents that were received by EMA prior to Policy 70. Policy 70 is EMA's prospective policy that requires specified submission documents to proactively be made public for all MAAs submitted as of January 1st, 2015, and for all indication extensions and line extensions submitted as of July 1st, 2015. The Policy 70 document itself is only 22 pages in length and primarily addressed company confidential information. It focused very little on personal protected data. The long-awaited guidance document that was published in March of this year provided more of the specifics as to how sponsors were to actually execute Policy 70. Throughout its 91 pages, it laid out many more requirements around personal protected data. Policy 70 is meant to be a two-round process. In the first round, labeled by the EMA as the redacted proposal version, the deliverables include a cover letter with templated language provided in the guidance document, a document list of all the documents submitted in the redacted proposal version, and the submission documents that include proposed anonymization changes and proposed company confidential information redaction, and the justification table listing the company confidential information proposed for redaction, and lastly, the anonymization report outlining the method by which the submission documents were anonymized for privacy information. The final redacted version includes a slightly shorter list of deliverables that will ultimately all be made public, to include the cover letter, the document list, the previously listed submission documents with finalized anonymization techniques, and the anonymization report, which will also be made public. So what is involved in the anonymization of submission documents and the removal of company confidential information? First, let's understand anonymization. Submission documents contain personal data. The EMA defines personal data as any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. Recital 26 of the EU General Data Protection Regulation, which drives how privacy is handled in the EU states, to anonymize any data, the data must be stripped of sufficient elements such that the data subject can no longer be identified by all likely and reasonable means. So to properly anonymize the submission document, sponsors must ensure that re-identification cannot occur using linkability, singling out, and inference. In the early days of privacy, it was thought that just by removing basic information, like ID numbers in the case of clinical trials, or names in the case of medical records, that individuals could not be re-identified. But through malicious attacks and through demonstration attacks done by researchers, we now understand that more must be done to protect privacy. The idea is that the more information that is provided about an individual, not including names, the easier it is to re-identify a person using the information in the document and outside sources. Completely preventing linkability, singling out, and inference is extremely difficult and significantly impacts data utility. So the EMA has provided another option to assess anonymization in which sponsors can conduct a risk assessment of their anonymization methods. The options to anonymize document includes masking, otherwise known as redaction. It is the act of removing personal data and replacing it typically with black boxes, or in the case of EMA, replacing it with blue boxes. Other techniques include noise addition, permutation, differential privacy, aggregation, k-anonymity, and L-diversity. All of these options have different impacts on the risk of re-identification and data utility. The current preferred solution for most sponsors is masking or redaction. The first two Policy 70 documents made public on October 20th by EMA both use redaction techniques. EMA acknowledges in the guidance document that this is going to be the preferred route in industry in the initial phase of implementing Policy 70. The guidance document states, EMA understands that in an initial phase redaction, techniques are likely to be used by applicants' MAHs, taking into account that for a certain period, pharmaceutical companies will have to anonymize their data retrospectively. The reasons that masking are appealing in the short term is that, one, we're dealing with retrospective redaction. Many of the trials and the submissions currently being prepared for Policy 70 and some of the clinical study reports were written for those trials were prepared prior to Policy 70 even being published. The patients were not informed during the consent process that their information was going to be made public, nor were the documents written with broad publication in mind. Secondly, some of the other techniques would require that an entirely new document be created in order to actually modify the content of the document. That poses efficiency and cost issues. Additionally, when creating another document, the format must go back to a Word format rather than a PDF, and this creates quality control implications once the document is reopened for modification. Throughout the remaining portion of this presentation, we will refer to personal data as personal protected data, or PPD. This is the way that the EMA labels the information in Policy 70. Personal protected data in regulatory documents typically covers patients and study administrators. Patients includes the patients themselves, but also their spouses, partners, children, or infants referred to in the studies as a part of the patient's participation. Study administrators, in essence, includes everyone else mentioned in the submission documents, people like investigators, sponsor employees, committee members, and vendors, the people that make the studies and submissions happen. The anonymization report that we referred to seeks to outline a couple of things. First, its primary purpose is to outline the methods by which the sponsor protected the privacy of both the patients and study administrators. How did the sponsor anonymize the document? Additionally, sponsors must also state how they maximize data utility. EMA states in its opening line of Policy 70, the aim of the EMA is to protect and foster public health. Transparency is a key consideration for the agency in delivering its service to patients and society. So while privacy is paramount, the EMA wants to ensure that sponsors are conducting a best effort to provide as much useful information in this process as possible. The EMA has suggested that they will not review the actual submission documents themselves for all the proposed anonymization. They will review the anonymization report and provide feedback to the report as to whether they agree or disagree. But as a side note to share now, we've learned that in these early phases, the EMA is actually reviewing the anonymization report and the proposed anonymization documents, anonymized documents. Company confidential information, or CCI, is information that is not in the public domain and where disclosure may undermine the legitimate economic interest of the sponsor. Sponsors must list all of their proposed CCI redactions in the deliverable called the justification table. This table must also include location of the CCI and the rationale for requesting its removal. During the consultation phase, the EMA will both validate what has been proposed for removal and they will provide direct feedback to each line of requested CPI within the justification table. Prior to Policy 70, a lot of the transparency efforts being made by sponsors were as a result of Policy 43, as previously mentioned, sponsors' own transparency policies, and CSR documents required to be submitted with publication. Policy 43 and some of the sponsor transparency efforts resulted from individuals, typically considered to be researchers, but often competitors, could request documents from the EMA or directly from the sponsors. In the case of Policy 43, the EMA redacted the documents and provided the sponsors an opportunity to suggest additional redactions or modifications to existing redactions proposed by the EMA. For requests made directly to the sponsors, the sponsor was able to choose what and how to anonymize. In both cases, the documents were being provided to individuals. And in the case of direct-to-sponsor requests, the sponsor had the opportunity to determine the terms of use. In this post-Policy 70 era, the practices are quite different. Rather than coming up with overall anonymization policies, sponsors are being asked to assess each and every submission on its own to determine unique anonymization techniques that will maximize data utility and protect patient privacy for each and every submission. Excuse me. Sponsors can no longer fully choose how they want to anonymize their documents. The EMA is weighing in on how anonymization should be carried out. There are additional deliverable requirements as well, the justification table and the anonymization report. And one of the biggest factors is that these documents are now being made public and not going to a specific individual. And lastly, the EMA dictates the terms of use for the individuals who choose to access these publicly posted documents. This is the submission process under Policy 70 that the EMA has proposed. The redaction proposal versions are to be supplied to EMA between 181 to 220 days after submission day 0. The consultation phase is supposed to generally take 42 days, and the sponsors will then have 27 days to implement and respond to the EMA's feedback. The final goal is to have the documents published within 60 days of the European Commission issuing its decision. But we're not there yet. Currently, the EMA is playing catch-up. They are working back from the earliest opinions in September of 2015. Based on what the sponsors we support have experienced, the EMA reaches out with a letter and typically requests the redacted proposal version to be provided within 30 days. Some of our sponsors have successfully negotiated that timeline. The sponsor delivers the redacted proposal version at the agreed-upon date, and then for now, the consultation process actually seems to be more of a back and forth, with the initial sponsors taking several months to get through consultation. Obviously, the EMA is aiming to speed up this portion of the process. Once the back and forth is finalized, the final redacted version is submitted back to the EMA with the agreed-upon update. At Synchrogenix, we have developed our own process to handle preparation with a client for redaction services. So first, we determine the services. Clients work with our professional services team to identify the scope of redaction volume. Is it just for Policy 70? Does the scope cover Policy 43? Or maybe some additional sponsor-based transparency policies? Second, we align the teams. We hold kickoff meetings. Synchrogenix reviews any anonymization, redaction policies that already exist within the sponsor's organization. In the first run step, we redact the documents according to a base Policy 70 rule set that we at Synchrogenix have refined over time through research and experience. In step 4, we present that base Policy 70 rule set to the sponsor, and we allow the sponsor to review the first run document that was redacted based on the rule set. Then we work with the sponsor to customize the rule set according to the sponsor's sense of balance between risk of re-identification and data utility. In step 5, we update the first run based on new customizations. We conduct a second run, and in the background, we build the sponsor-specific configuration. Once the second run is complete, we move to step 6, in which sponsors review second run and make any additional updates to the rules. And in step 7, we go live. Go live means that we are no longer modifying the standard rules for the client. We are moving forward on their submission documents. As we will discuss in a bit, we still do have back and forth for the submissions, but it's more specific to the documents rather than global rule set or global configuration changes. This slide provides you with a sense of our capabilities within the process and the steps that take place within Synchrogenix. We have an artificial intelligence system that conducts the initial redaction review. Each sponsor with whom we work gets its own AI configuration with specific configurations for each rule set. We also have a sophisticated front-end tool in which the redaction reviewers review the AI system proposed redactions and in which they can add redactions that the system missed according to the sponsor's rule set, whether it's a base policy 70 rule set or a special population rule set. We have a scalable and experienced team of redaction reviewers who review the documents once the AI system has had its first pass. What do we mean by base policy 70 and rule sets? Well, with the anonymization technique of masking or redaction, sponsors must determine the rules that will govern their redaction policy. Then they must consistently apply these rules across the documents and explain the rules in the anonymization report. In the pre-policy 70 days, one rule set was sufficient. It was typically a fairly conservative rule set that could be applied across all trial types. But in the policy 70 era, that's no longer the case. Rule sets are needed for different trial types. The characteristics that have driven the different rule sets we have created for sponsors include disease prevalence. Is the trial a rare disease or an ultra-rare disease? Population size, the smaller the number of patients participating, the easier it is to identify those patients. Number of study sites, the smaller number of studies, it's easier to narrow down the location of the participants. Number of patients per site. If a small number of individual patients are linked to a site, that also makes it easier to narrow down specific patients. Sites per country. Most often we retain country because the EMA requests it. What happens when you have one site in a particular country? So who approves the rules for each sponsor? And the answer is really that it varies, at least across our client base. But what typically doesn't vary is that there are almost always a group of stakeholders in the transparency and disclosure decisions, particularly around Policy 70 because of the broad publication of the documents. The stakeholders include representatives from medical writing, statistics, legal, regulatory, and therapeutic areas. Medical writing because they're really the closest to the sponsor's document. Statistics because they typically have anonymization technique experience preparing de-identified data sets for the organization. Legal because they represent the sponsor's overall policy on privacy and privacy concerns. Regulatory because they're typically orchestrating the communication with the EMA. And therapeutic area representatives because they know the particular compound and can represent the complexities of the submission. Also, the therapeutic area team members understand what should be considered for CPI that has not yet been shared with the public and has future value. I hope that you're starting to get a sense of the complexity of this process and the requirements, and more importantly, that you are getting a sense that at different points in the process, collaboration is required within the sponsor, with the sponsor and the vendor if you've chosen an outsourced option, and at some points in the process between the sponsor and the EMA. This slide outlines many of the steps in the process of preparing for a Policy 70 submission. Obviously, there are an abundance of steps and some of the detail has been left off, but I think what's most important about this slide and its representation is the process, the steps in the process requiring collaboration. Out of the 25 steps represented in this slide, 13 require collaboration of some kind. These collaborative steps are represented by the red boxes. So what makes this post-Policy 70 requirement more complex and pushing towards a higher level of collaboration? Here are some reasons for consideration. What has the sponsor posted on ClinicalTrials.gov? The purpose of providing investigator information to include location on ClinicalTrials.gov is that sponsors want this information to help with recruitment. It lets the public know if the trial is taking place in their area and provides information to allow them to volunteer for the trial. However, what if this trial is a rare disease study or small population in which at a later date under Policy 70, the sponsor wants to keep investigator information private in order to provide greater anonymization protection for patients? Another complexity is around scope. Right now, the way the policy is written, only trials provided in submissions made after January 1st, 2015 will need to have their corresponding CSRs included in the submission package. What happens when you have pediatric studies? With the EMA, CSRs for pediatric studies must be delivered within 6 months of trial close. So for a pediatric submission made after January 1st, 2015, all the corresponding studies may have actually been provided separately prior to that date. Per the policy, those trials are currently out of scope, but we've been hearing that the EMA is rethinking this position. The same issue could affect line extensions and extension of indication submissions. As the policy gets started, the submission-level documents provided for extension studies may reference CSRs that were provided in a pre-Policy 70 submission. Those CSRs are currently out of scope for Policy 70, but will the EMA begin to rethink this position as well? Study characteristics also pose issues. Once the sponsor has done their due diligence in creating rule sets corresponding to different trial characteristics, the specific characteristics of particular trials can cause problems. For instance, single country studies, single ethnicity studies, single gender studies, and sensitive information studies. Take this snip pulled from clinicaltrials.gov. This trial includes only females who are all white. Gender, when shown with other PPD, is a piece of demographic information that many researchers have proven is one of the identifiers increasing the risk of re-identification. So in the case of special population studies like small population or rare disease, a sponsor would ideally like to redact gender. If clinicaltrials.gov reflects that the inclusion criteria is female, that information is already public. So should the sponsor actually redact it for that particular trial? The same issue holds for ethnicity. Ethnicity is another identifier that has been shown to increase the risk of re-identification. In this case, clinicaltrials.gov reveals the ethnicity. Should a sponsor attempt to redact it in Policy 70 documents if the information is already in the public domain? Should sponsors begin to make earlier efforts to keep this information out of the public domain? This is another snip of a clinicaltrials.gov posting for a trial. In this case, the title of the study reveals the ethnicity of its participants, Japanese. The study also reflects with an enrollment number of 24 that it is a small population study. For small population, we would ideally like to redact ethnicity, but in this case, it has already been made public. It's a part of the actual title of the study. So should ethnicity be redacted for Policy 70 in a scenario like this, even if it's a part of your rule set? Redaction in and of itself is more complicated under Policy 70, and as a result requires a much greater level of collaboration within your organization and with your vendor if you have outsourced. The redaction complications have to do with types of sections within the document. What do you do with listings, narratives, mini-narratives for non-standard trials? Demographic complications, like the issues we proposed with single gender, single ethnicity studies, and other identifier type complications for non-standard studies, like does medical information create too high a risk of re-identification? But if it's removed, is there any data utility remaining? The anonymization report has complexities requiring collaboration as well. So sponsors must choose between two risk assessment methods to assess the risk of re-identification for each submission, qualitative versus quantitative. Sponsors must also determine what risk threshold they will aim to achieve for a particular submission. And corresponding with this decision, they must take into account different attacker scenarios and which one they believe is most appropriate. Sponsors must then assess the risk of re-identification against the predetermined threshold and then speak to how data utility was maintained. And lastly, sponsors must make global redaction decisions as well as decisions specific to each submission, and on an even more granular level, decisions specific to each trial. The justification table complications requiring collaboration have to do with the fact that a unique rationale is required for each proposed CCI redaction. EMA has stated that they will not accept canned answers across the CCI request. Over time, many of the complexities that I've discussed in these prior slides will become more stabilized. Industry will gain experience, incorporate best practices into the writing of these documents, and have access to better technology that will enable them to handle the complexities in a more sophisticated manner. We are certainly working diligently within our organization to stay ahead of the innovation curve in order to bring sponsors a more diverse set of options to handle their transparency and disclosure needs. A part of that innovation strategy is our partnership with PleaseTech. While the complexities still remain today, PleaseTech's future 6.1 release of their PleaseReview software will provide an incredible tool to more efficiently handle the collaboration needs of the Policy 70 era. PleaseTech's newly announced PleaseReview 6.0 release represents PleaseReview users presents PleaseReview users with the redaction capabilities. The planned and very exciting 6.1 release makes it possible for Synchrogenix to create a seamless redaction process that streamlines collaboration across the entire process. David will speak to the new and innovative features that are planned for the 6.1 release, and I will follow that up with how PleaseReview incorporates into our process. David, I'll hand it off to you now.
Thank you very much, Laura. So, welcome everybody. My name is David Cornwell. I'm the CEO of PleaseTech. And I think Laura did a great job there of explaining the complexities and the background to the Policy 70 initiative and the need to redact or mask documents. Clearly, this is a complicated problem, and the way we see it, from where we sit, which is from a document review perspective, the more complicated the problem, the more the documents need to be reviewed prior to their approval and dissemination. So we see a lot of this as a document review problem, ultimately a document review problem as the document needs to be reviewed. The other point Laura made was that 13 steps of the 25 steps required collaboration, and collaboration, of course, is our middle name. That's what we do. So we're excited to be working with Synchrogenix on this. We see this as a great opportunity for both companies to meet the needs of our clients, to further meet the needs of our clients and go above and beyond what we're doing. So what I'm going to do is just move on now and talk about the process and what PleaseReview can do in this process and how it can assist. So the first thing to look at is the current redaction issues. We've got a complex process. Laura put up a timeline there, and you could see that that was a significant timeline. And so if you are looking at purely a manual process, you can be talking about many weeks, and we put an example up there, 15 weeks. And that obviously is a long time, and it may not meet your timescale. It may delay what you're trying to achieve. So the point is you need technology thrown at this. And throwing PleaseReview at it can significantly cut your timelines, just as it can with document review. Manual processes can be time-consuming, they can be error-prone, and so on. With quasi-automated processes and collaborative processes, working simultaneously on the document can significantly reduce the amount of time spent on the process. Everybody's working on the same copy of the document, so you don't have any version control issues. We produce tracking reports, so there's no difficulty in tracking and reporting, and the justification report can be produced currently quasi-automatically, at least the first cut, which you can then edit, and then ultimately our aim, as I will show you, is to produce it completely automatically. And so we're looking to significantly reduce the time and try and get it down to a couple of weeks. So the next couple of slides are aimed at existing PleaseReview users. I know we have some existing PleaseReview users on the call, and so you've got a copy of PleaseReview, and what can it do for you today, the copy you have? And the answer is you can review and comment upon documents marked for redaction. So Adobe Acrobat has got two states of redaction. The first is marked for redaction. That is where it's not applied, but it's been sort of proposed for redaction, as we would call it, proposal for redaction. And then you've got the applied redaction, where it's actually applied and redacted and blacked out and is non-reversible. So if you suck a document which has got marked for redaction proposals into PleaseReview, you will see them in the image-based PleaseReview version. If you're using image for PDF review, you will see them looking like that. And these can be commented upon. So at this point, you can have the full commenting capability. You can go in, you can comment. Many people can look at them simultaneously at leisure and have discussion threads and so on. So you can review those proposals for redactions, those redaction proposals. The next thing we can say is that if you are using existing PleaseReview and you are using the PDF plugin, then the PDF will be displayed within PleaseReview. You can see the PleaseReview toolbar at the top there and Acrobat buried inside it there. And again, you will see these marked for redaction aspects there. Looks exactly like the image, with the exception that because this is PDF now, when you mouse over it'll show you what the full outline is, just as if you were in Acrobat itself. So you've got there not only the ability to see what has been proposed and marked for redaction, but also the mouse over shows the color of the redaction and any overlay text that you've got on that. So that is what PleaseReview, which you have installed today, can do. Some of you may be aware that we have just released version 6, an exciting new release, and we've introduced into that simple redaction. So what does that mean? The first thing is that we've not taken away anything. So with PleaseReview version 6, if you load a PDF document which has marked for redaction in Acrobat in it, you will see the areas marked for redaction, and again, you can comment on those, you can have discussion threads, and so on. This is currently more akin to the image, so there's no ability to mouse over and see the color and the overlay text, but you can download a copy of the original one to look at that. But at least many people can discuss it, review it, and so on. The other thing we can do is actually redact within PleaseReview. So we see this as quite a simple process. We don't see a huge difference between a proposed change and edit to a document and a proposed redaction, which is fundamentally, if you think about it, an edit to a document. So it works broadly, if you're familiar with PleaseReview, in the same way that the proposed change basis works. People can mark up an area to be redacted. They can make comments associated with that. Those comments can have replies. There can be discussion threads around them, and those can be accepted or rejected. And of course, they're all recorded and reported upon, which I'll discuss. You can see that the redaction is actually a little. It grays it out, and you can see the underlying text. So it just sort of puts a light filter on it to show it is going to be redacted. And by clicking the little button up there, you can turn it into a black, see what it would look like, black redaction, or ultimately a colored one as we move forward, as I'll talk about. But so that's the basic ability to redact, but it falls into the PleaseReview ethos of collaboration. Many people can redact on the same document simultaneously or at leisure. They can see each other's comments and changes and redactions. They can actually, reply to them and have discussion threads, and the person who owns the review manages the process and can accept and reject those redactions. And of course, all of that is recorded. We can currently output a redacted document, so I'm sure we've all seen what a redacted document looks like, and there you have one. Very exciting it is too. So, but the other important thing I mentioned was the justification report. So what we can do is we produce automatically something called a reconciliation report in PleaseReview, and with the redactions, it's no different. Those redactions are included in the reconciliation report. So the activity captured is who, what, where, when, and that report can be obtained as Microsoft Word. So you can grab that with all the redactions in it as a Word document and use that as the basis of your justification report, or you can copy and paste from that into another justification report, and at the very least that saves an awful lot of retyping. So there is it's the first stage on that. Now, what we fully accept is this is just the first step. Every journey starts with a single step, and this is the first step. We have a new release coming out in the end of Q1 next year, and that is aimed to put in what we're calling advanced redaction, and it's specifically geared to looking at the requirements around Policy 70. We're working closely with Synchrogenix on their requirements. We've got a few clients who are feeding us information as well, and so what we've done is come up with a sort of the specification, what we're aiming to deliver by the end of Q1. And the first one of those is categorization. So the idea behind that is that you'll be able to categorize redactions according to the type. So, obviously CCI, PPD, IPD. And our understanding of the requirement is that the EMA will require redactions of different types in different colors with different overlay text. All of that can be configured in our system so that when you put in a redaction type CCI, that will determine, according to whatever the EMA has dictated, will determine the color, the overlay text, and any other properties associated with that redaction. So you're not having to fiddle around in Acrobat and set properties to do that, etc., etc. You will just be able to select a category and do that. We've also we'll make it so that when you select a category, that category will be the category that you always apply until you change it. So if you're doing a CCI redaction process, you only have to select CCI once, and that will always be CCI until you change it, and that makes it nice and simple. Round tripping, what do we mean by that? Well, let's be able to import the PDF marked for redaction, manage those redactions within PleaseReview so we can discuss them. Then if we don't like them, we can reject them, which would delete them. And so rather than just be able to comment on them, we can actively manage the redactions which have been put in an Acrobat document marked for redaction and decide what to do with them. And so that will automatically import into PleaseReview as PleaseReview redactions. The aim then is to be able to export those into a PDF and especially when we're not sure we can do this, but our aim is to enable us to say open redactions we haven't accepted or rejected are marked for redaction in that PDF, and accepted redactions are actually applied. So with Acrobat at the moment, it's all or nothing. So you've got to get your PDF document to a point where all the marked for redactions are accepted, and then you hit the apply redaction and it applies everything in the document. We hope to be able to make that a more incremental approach and therefore a more controlled approach. Another thing we're looking at doing and delivering is merging separately redacted documents. So we do see processes, and our clients see processes, where separate teams maybe will be marking up CCI and then private and personal data. So you might have Synchrogenix marking up PPD, while an internal team looks at the documents for CCI. And you want to be able to do that in parallel to reduce the time, not take one output and then mark up and move forward. You want to be able to merge all that together, and that's exactly what we're planning to deliver. And then finally, of course, we want to be able to spit out a better justification report, which means you don't have to do much work to it to make it into a final report. And we're working closely with our clients on what exactly that means and what it should look like and how it should be arranged and ordered and so on. So that is what we're trying to do, and move the existing, what we're calling simple redaction in version 6, to a much more sophisticated redaction process. As I said, some of this will be coming out, by the way, as it's delivered, but it will be all wrapped up in the final release called version 6.1 by the end of Q1 next year, 2017. So in summary, what we're saying here in PleaseReview land is existing versions of PleaseReview. If you've got PleaseReview, you can review redactions today. With version 6, you can also create redactions. With version 6.1, you'll have a very sophisticated tool which will go a very long way towards making a really cool Policy 70 tool. And so with that, I'm going to hand the ball back over to Lora, and she will wrap up with the process here.
Thank you, David. Now that David has outlined the new redaction capabilities that already exist and the ones that are the exciting new features that are coming within PleaseReview, I'd like to outline how our two services can be merged to create a streamlined process for the document redaction portion of the process. The blue squares in this slide represent the steps that Synchrogenix will handle as a part of our service offering. The orange squares, and actually they're part of the service offering that we do offer even not in conjunction now with PleaseReview. The orange squares represent the steps that the sponsor must execute. Some of them are optional, not mandatory. It's somewhat dependent upon the sponsor's desire for a particular review step. So steps completed in the top rectangle, these represent steps that are handled within the PleaseReview system. And then the steps in this lower rectangle represent the steps that are handled within the Synchrogenix AI system and the front-end tool. So the sponsor will continue to upload their package of documents to the Synchrogenix web portal for PPD review. Synchrogenix will then initiate a dual process, and this is really where the efficiencies come in. We will upload the documents provided to us to PleaseReview. Simultaneously, we will begin to send the documents through our AI engine process. Once both of those steps are completed, the CCI review is completed by the sponsor and the PPD review is completed with Synchrogenix, we can send our version back into the PleaseReview system, and we can merge it with the sponsor's CCI reviewed version. The combined document would then be progressed into publishing review, a step that Synchrogenix can handle. From the publishing review, if the sponsor elects, they can have their final review of the documents, and then from there, the Synchrogenix will finalize it and release back to the sponsor. So Synchrogenix, we currently have a solution that allows sponsors to pre-review and mark documents for CCI. Our AI tool then converts those marks to redaction and creates the justification table. But what we found is, and it has been a sufficient fix for sponsors, but it just means that the steps must be conducted consecutively rather than simultaneously. And we found that, you know, given the experience that a lot of these team members have had, that this is the first time that they are reviewing for CCI, the CCI portion of the process can actually hold up the process quite a bit. So conducting both processes simultaneously really allows us to cut down on the time required to do the entire process. But still give sponsors an ample amount of time to review for CCI. So our takeaways today. Today we've outlined the Policy 70 impact to transparency initiatives within sponsor organizations. We've outlined how that impact has created a more complex process that's pushed organizations to a higher level of collaboration on transparency documents. And as David outlined, the current redaction capabilities of PleaseReview, and then shared with us those versions that will be available, those capabilities that will be available within 6.0, and then the fact that within the 6.1 version we'll be able to create a complete integration with Synchrogenix and also fully comply with Policy 70. So lastly, we'd just like to leave you with the combination of PleaseTech and Synchrogenix technology and services and how it creates an opportunity to streamline a very complex and collaborative process. And now I believe we have some time for questions.
Thanks, Laura and Dave, for that very informative presentation. As Laura said, we encourage our audience to submit their questions now for Laura and Dave into the Q&A panel. Looks like we have our first question from the audience for Laura. Does the Synchrogenix redaction management system only implement redaction and masking, or anonymization transformation as well?
Currently, our system just does masking, but as a part of kind of our innovation strategy and where we're headed, we are investing resources in moving our capabilities further to handle other options.
Great. How do you go about creating a rule set with your clients?
So with each of our clients, we start out, as I shared, we have a base Policy 70 rule set, and we've actually developed multiple variations of that. So a rule set that's the least conservative to sort of a middle ground, and then a rule set that's more conservative. And we start with sharing those rule sets with the sponsors, and then the sponsors themselves, once they actually see how those rule sets are implemented within their documents, I think it gives them a better sense of how that rule set is actually executed, and we have discussions to customize it to suit the sponsor's balance of risk of re-identification and data utility.
Someone would like to know, how do you help companies calculate the residual risk of a document?
So currently, when we have supported anonymization reports, we support a qualitative anonymization process. And so what we do is we work with sponsors to go through and look at the different identifiers and assess the risk of those identifiers. And then once we kind of come up with our threshold, that also drives our conversation with the rule set. Which identifiers would we classify as high? Which ones do we classify as medium? And those are really the identifiers that we need to manage. and to try and come up with different techniques, segmenting within the various identifier sets to allow some information to be retained but redact other. With most scenarios, in working with the assessment with sponsors, we try to achieve a low threshold of risk, residual risk of re-identification.
One of our attendees wants to know, will PleaseReview access be offered as part of the Synchrogenix service?
So we currently, through our medical writing side, we have sponsors who come to us, who work with us, who don't have PleaseReview access, and we develop that capability. We are able to provide them PleaseReview access to work on writing documents, and we foresee being able to implement the same type of service with our sponsors who are not yet using PleaseReview. We'll be, quite hopeful that our sponsors will see what a great product it is and ultimately want to have the service themselves, but at least initially we will have the capability to provide that to sponsors who don't already have it.
Someone would like to have you comment about the timing of EMA Policy 70 Part B.
The EMA has not come forward with any phase 2 timing feedback at all. So we currently do not know when the data sets are going to be requested, the anonymized data sets. And I think given how slowly they're working through the queue of the phase 1 submissions, that it will most likely be a while.
Looks like we have one final question from our audience. Is the technology and process that you've discussed today available in multiple other languages?
Yeah, let me take that one. Certainly from the PleaseReview perspective, we are starting to introduce French and I believe Spanish. We've got a Japanese interface and a Chinese interface at the moment. There are other interfaces under development. So from a technology perspective, yes, but I guess it makes it harder for redaction depending on the document language itself. So I think the document language, the language in which the document is written, is completely separate from the software interface perspective. PleaseReview itself can handle multiple language documents, Unicode documents, so that's not a problem, but obviously that complicates the issue when it comes to the redaction, because you need to know what to redact in the language